Welcome to Part of the System, and today I'm with Hayley Lever. How are you doing, Hayley?
I'm really good, thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And you're in the UK. What time is it this morning?
It is 6:38 a.m. and it's spring.
Wow, that's really good of you to jump online at such an early time. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to run over your bio just for a second, then we'll get stuck into it. But for 30 years, Hayley has played a leadership role in physical activity, sport, and policy and community development. Currently, as the CEO of GM Moving, she is a committed community volunteer and charity trustee where she lives in the Peak District in the UK. Sounds lovely. And supports several advisory boards and community of practice and learning. Hayley has always believed in the power of an active life for health, happiness, friendship, and community. She's a passionate advocate of this agenda in her culture change, systems change, behaviour change work in Greater Manchester and beyond. Now, Hayley's involved in lots of work shifting culture and systems across the whole devolved and integrated system in Greater Manchester, including health, local government, charity, private and social enterprise sectors. She has developed her understanding of working in complex systems from a community perspective to a strategic one. Now, Hayley is well known for leading with humility and curiosity and an open approach to learning and connecting others through her writings, podcasts like today, and facilitating of spaces for people to connect and build relationships so that they can do great work together. Now, Hayley recognises that the working in complexity is challenging in practice, and what she preaches, she disconnects, unwinds, and makes sense of her work whilst walking, swimming, running in the Peak District where she lives. Hayley believes that we do our best work when we are physically and mentally well, and supports her teams and colleagues to do that first. Fantastic, Hayley. Wow, that's 30 years. There's a lot in that, and hopefully we'll get to dig into that a little bit now. So we'll get straight into it. Tell us a bit about your background, Hayley.
Yeah, so 30 years. It's been interesting actually, because I turned 50 at the end of last year. So you do that, don't you? Sort of reflect a bit of like, oh, that's actually 30 years of paid proper job work, and yeah, it was quite an interesting period to reflect on. So I started out sort of my career in really as a volunteer. So I did a lot of volunteering. When I was sort of just finished university, I was pulled in really into the Women's Sports Foundation in the northeast of England. So I was up in Newcastle at the time. I'd done a degree in geography. I was starting PhD research and teaching at university there, and I got involved in the northeast regional group of Women's Sports Foundation as a volunteer. And actually, I got about a year and a half into my PhD, and I realised it wasn't where I needed to be, and I was desperate to work and to make a more immediate difference through what I was doing. And so my first job in youth sport development down in Warwickshire was really the segue into that from the work I'd been doing with Women's Sports Foundation as much as anything. Like many people, I'd been involved in sport, loved sport as a teenager, done lots of kind of volunteering, coaching, play schemes, sports coaching, community stuff in Coventry growing up. As a way, it started out as a decent way of earning money because you got paid more to do play schemes in the summer than you did to work in the VG supermarket. But, I realised that actually it's not all about the money. It's about the joy that you get in a job, which is so different to kind of working in a shop, which was the other things I was doing. So yeah, I started my career out in youth sport development, and then at the time the National Junior Sport Programme, and followed that through into generic sports development in the High Peaks. I moved to Glossop in 1999 for their first sports development officer job across the whole council. And then went from there really quite in a way, quite a traditional sports development route which was really just emerging as a profession then. So I say traditional, I guess, more uniform is probably the right way of putting it. There were quite a lot of people on that journey at the time coming out of that National Junior Sport Programme. I did take a secondment and then a role in the council policy team around that time as well for a couple of years, which was really interesting, and it's probably shaped more of what I've done in the longer term than I realised at the time, because again I kind of came back into the physical activity and sports sector, realising that the policy, the more generic, wider policy work wasn't quite close enough to my sweet spot of what I care about and enjoy, really. And so I came back into working in the Aswas County Sports Partnership, running a community social enterprise in Derbyshire for a number of years, and then moved to Greater Manchester in 2017. So I've been there 7 years now, and that role was different. Again, came out of the devolution work. It came out of some work that Sport England was doing with Greater Manchester at that time to move towards a kind of systems approach to this work. And they created a role which was a 6-month interim role because they didn't have everything in place to create something longer term financially and governance wise. And they created a 6-month interim role, and it was co-funded by Sport England, the NHS in Greater Manchester, and the Combined Authority, which was emerging around the time of the first mayoral elections. So it was a bit of a risk, really, because I was leaving a full-time sort of permanent job to go to a 6-month contract, and we've got 3 kids, under whatever the age they were, teenagers at the time. So it felt like it didn't feel like a risk to me, but my husband was a bit kind of like, oh, why would you do that? But I knew really that what Greater Manchester was doing at the time, there would absolutely be a future beyond that 6 months, and that I wouldn't look back once I'd moved. So I made that move into that sort of 6-month contract hosted by Greater Sport, the Active Partnership, and working across that whole system really in something that was very new and exploratory. And then I suppose just the sort of final bit of that is then in just before the pandemic, so 2019-20, I took on the chief exec role of the Active Partnership alongside that wider system role. So I then was back in an organisational leadership position, looking after a team and an organisation and in the traditional sense. And that role and the system leadership role for GM Moving has morphed and integrated over the last few years. So it's now one role, chief exec of what is now called GM Moving, the organisation as well as the movement. And that's been the case for probably the last two or 3 years now. So yeah, that's right in a nutshell.
Yeah,
30 years.
And it's great how you've worked from the ground up, so you've had all those experiences, and then it seems like now when you work with GM Moving, it's like you work, it's moving outwards and across the system. But I've known you for a number of years, and you are an inspiration to me, and you've actually shaped a lot of my thinking and my where I want to go in the future and where I want to play and have an influence, Hayley. But for our listeners who might not be aware of GM Moving, can you just share with us a little bit about what is it?
Yeah, so GM Moving is a movement for movement in Greater Manchester. So it recognises that movement has been designed out of life, right across the world. It matters to all of us. It's got a massive role to play in the health and happiness and in our communities and for people. So it's a movement for movement. It's grown out of a recognition of the relationship really between health inequalities, economic inequalities in the city region. We've got huge inequalities, and when going back 2014, before that recognition came out of the wider Greater Manchester sort of independent economic review. So it's like there's a real close tie between health and productivity and inequalities. And then at the time, before my time, it was very much about recognising the cost of inactivity to the public purse, but to people and communities and health. And a recognition that whilst we've done brilliant work, and whilst people in Greater Manchester have done brilliant work for decades around the projects and programmes to support people to be more active and to participate in sport, it wasn't having the sort of population scale change that was needed. And there were lots of systemic and cultural barriers in the way to a truly active city region. So the mission around Active Lives for All, as we describe it now, was really born out of that recognition of the cost and the challenge around inactivity and inequalities. Now, alongside, what does it mean to grow a movement? So it's growing from the bottom up, and also over time we recognise that it needs real strategic leadership and buy-in. It needs alignment of resources. It needs a sort of people focused on a mission and pointing in a direction, and it needs some structure and form around it. So there is a strategy. There's a set of business plans and priorities. There's a growing every day number of programs and projects and work going on within our team, and just way beyond in terms of across the whole system. Because really, if we're making movement everyone's business, then success looks like when movement is kind of sprinkled into every part of the system in terms of policy and strategy, and the work of people working on transport and health and adult social care and children's services and youth work, and right across the board. So the dream really is to see that everybody sees how movement matters to the thing that they're working on, and vice versa, that movement has a contribution to make to what they're trying to achieve as well. So I guess over my 7 years in the role, it's the movement's grown, and every single day I see and hear evidence of that change. In the way that it becomes more embedded, the recognition, the belief and the understanding of how movement matters becomes more and more embedded right across the region, and in all the people, sort of all the communities that we're working with and for. So so it's a movement, it's a strategy, it's a plan, it's a team, it's many things working at scale.
And you talked about some of those different stakeholders and areas that GM movements across. Like, how do you get everybody working towards a common vision? Like, because there's a lot of groups there, and maybe that links in a little bit to what systems leadership is about for you.
Patiently, tenaciously, holding
Can
your nerve.
You can do that at the same time? Yeah.
Yeah, it's and impatiently as well, actually. I think my reflections on that question would be, it is about the clarity of and the simplicity of moving matters to everybody, and how you unlock that sort of alignment is actually quite simple. It's about belief and sort of agency and influence. So and I saw this never more than through the pandemic, when we all moved online, and we were very quickly realised that keeping GM moving was absolutely vital to the pandemic effort and the recovery. Because there was a real moment where it's like, well, should we all kind of be on furlough, or should we be redeploying ourselves to do something else and support the health system more directly or whatever? But there's a recognition at that time that keeping people moving was vital. So this work was never more important, and that unlocked during that period, I suppose, the most visible shift in that recognition of why it mattered and how it mattered. And we did a lot of, practically, we had to obviously run a lot of meetings and engagement and do the work through Zoom and Teams. And as a way of helping people to understand this and engage in the Zoom world and in the Teams world, we just started to ask a really simple question to get people talking, put in the chat, how does moving matter to you in your work? How does moving matter to you or your family or your community? And it was really just a way of like getting people in the room, but at the same time realize that, oh my word, this is such a simple question that unlocks this sort of sense of like belief, or helps people to see why this matters to what they're doing, whether they're working in a care home or whether they're working in a community. And so that has become really embedded as we have a set of questions that we can ask, which help people to see. And then we've had brilliant evaluators in this work in a number of different areas of the work over the last 6-7 years, who've helped us to recognise and see and evidence that belief and agency is vital. So you might really deeply believe that this matters, but you might feel that you haven't really got any agency to influence it. And so, or you might have loads of agency, you might be a real influencer in the system or in your organisation, but at the moment you don't really see or have a point of connection to why it matters. So our job really is to help people, if that's on a scale, if you know what I mean, if there's a scale of agency and belief, our job is to kind of move people up the scale. So there's high agency and high belief across the system. And then you get people like understanding the mission, understanding why it matters, and making a contribution to it. So it's about belief and agency. And then within that agency, one of the things that became really clear is that it's complex and massive, and you can talk about how complex it all is, but actually that can really become a struggle for people, because what people really want to understand is, what contribution can I make to this? So in amongst this time, and again during the pandemic, it became really clear that part of the leadership task, is to help people understand and then describe their contribution to the mission, whether that's as an individual, as a team, as an organisation. And so over time, that becoming clearer and clearer for people means that we've got more and more people and organisations pointing in a direction that supports the mission of Active Lives for All. And it doesn't have to be called that for them, so in transport, be called something else. In adult social care, it might be called something else. But you can see the work that people are doing that's contributing to the aim. And so it's also, I guess, about letting go of, it's a bit of an ego thing, I suppose, because I think in the old days we'd have thought, well, we need to have GM moving written in everyone's plans explicitly. But over time, as it becomes more and more mature as an approach, you can recognise it in people's plans and in people's work, even if it's not explicitly named as, we are supporting people to be physically active, or we are supporting GM moving. So it's about clarity of mission, constancy of mission. So not keep changing all over the place, but being clear, being constant. Having a kind of a North Star that everyone can aim towards, and then helping people to work out what their contribution is to it, and supporting them and celebrating that as well, and then recognising when people are doing stuff that matters to me, that they feel recognised and appreciated for their contribution to the mission. So, on next Monday, we've got about 800 people coming to the conference in Salford, and every single person in that room is making a contribution to GM Moving, and they need to feel that, they need to know and understand that as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's really rich in terms of an explanation there, and I'm curious, like, whilst you're holding all this, Hayley, what have you had to develop in yourself as from a leader? What is, the inner development goals are something that's become a bit more prominent, of these transformational skills to try and help us in terms of trying to achieve some of the sustainable development goals. And I'm just, you've been doing this work for a while, and as a leader, sometimes you change, as you grow and experience and things. So yeah, is there anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, lots. I mean, I think, well, learning and changing for one, is every day. So yesterday I was in a 3-hour inclusive communications training with 15 members of my team. Now I'm 50 years old. I'm in the twilight of my career, and I don't know that many chief execs take themselves on courses like that. Do you know what I mean? I was sitting there thinking, I wonder how many. I'm busy, like everyone is, and I was thinking about how rare it is to see chief executive officers doing learning and development in that sort of depth and that specificity, I suppose. It was just a moment where I thought, I wonder how many people do this. So the first thing I would say is learning all the time, the curiosity. I didn't know, when I moved to Greater Manchester, I didn't know how to lead a whole system approach to movement and grow a movement. I had loads of experience I could draw from, from like you said, from my community work, from my career so far. But it was a fundamentally different way of working. And so if I'm not learning and being curious and exploratory in that, if I assume I'm the finished article, and I was 43 at the time, if I assume I'm the finished article because I'm now a senior leader in a system, then I'm never going to achieve the goal, because it's, I see that sort of inner development is an ongoing daily practice. So recognizing that, because I think there's a culture around work and leadership where the higher up you go in the sort of hierarchy, I've grown up in a world where, work world where it's assumed that senior people are the finished article and it's all polished and they know everything, they're experts, and we have expertise, but we're not experts. So the culture of work that I grew up in is fundamentally like in polar opposite, pulls in the polar opposite direction to the way I need to be in this work now. So if I think about competitive, the way that performance measurement evolved during my early career, that drove competition, not only within yourself and your own teams, but also between organisations and different parts of the system, that is counter to the idea of shared mission and shared purpose, isn't it? So there was some assumptions and beliefs about what leadership is, about the way of working, that had to deliver projects and programs and assess against KPIs and have red, amber, green ratings as to how we were performing against certain things. All of those things have their place in a certain kind of work, but there was a real dissonance between those things and those ways of measuring progress and success and high performance as a leader and a manager of stuff, to something which is, as a systemic leader who is trying to change culture and change systems, some of the things that I have to do and some of the changes I have to lead are they are in polar opposite. Would pull in the total opposite direction. There'd be real dissonance between, because you actually have to be disruptive, and you have to change the status quo, and you have to challenge the assumptions and the things that have always been there. And that doesn't align very well to past cultures that I've worked in. So I do, and so what does that mean for me? And also, it's about collective effort, and it's not about proving that me or my organisation is the most important, doing the most important work and is the best in class. My job is to make it everyone's business and support everyone to make their contribution. That's a very different kind of leadership that's needed. I guess in the end, my reflection is that it feels more joyful and human, and it allows me to be me, actually. But I've had to rewire some sort of mental pathways or sort of that are developed over my career so far. So that felt hard, but now that just feels like a total joy, and there's a flow in the work and there's an ease with the work, and it's because it's about developing relationships and trust, and we're humans, aren't we? And that's what we do. So it actually allows you to be human in work and move away from being a bit of a robot and a competitor. Does that make sense?
It really resonates, actually, Hayley. Yeah, because you're in organizations and they have a certain way of working, and it can be sometimes there's bureaucracy there, and there's certain culture, and and it's that competitive nature, as you say. But to kind of just throw that away a little bit, and it's more about the collective, is how we can really look to change things. But I would imagine that would have been a bit messy to go through that process, to come out that other side now, where you're in a position where you're feeling joyful and contribution, and it's I'm sure a really nice space to be. But that's a development. That's a developmental to get to that stage, and it's then how can we, and there's not just one right way. There's lots, as we know, but this is obviously your journey, and it's impactful. But how can we get others to think like that? You've got 800 people, at this conference, so they must be thinking like this as well, in terms of working more collaboratively, but knowing you from how you are and connecting others and people to get and with your community of practice that you've got, it's very much around sharing.
I guess that is one of the other characteristics of the way of working. So to counter, to go from a world where you didn't share anything until it was polished and reviewed and evaluated and put in a shiny report to prove that you've done something good, to a world where you work out loud and you iterate and develop with other people. There's a vulnerability in it, and you referred to then just that transition. leading other people and supporting other people through that transition has been fascinating. And there was some times of real struggle and tension in that process. Even if I just think within the team, sort of the what was Greater Sport team, that's a partnership, to support people as they've moved from being an organisation that delivers projects and programmes to one which is being asked to influence across a system. There's some real personal journeys of struggle and change within that. There are some things that have then helped that process, which if I was starting again, if I knew then what I knew now, kind of about how you support people through that journey, it would have been a lot less painful. And I guess that's part of why I care so much about supporting other people on this journey, because it doesn't need to be as painful as it was for us, I don't think. And so that transition from one way of working to another can be really well supported by being really explicit about what good looks like and what we're striving for. Coaching, mentoring, developing ways of supporting people to understand what this is, how they do it, and how they know if they're doing a good job. Because what high performance looks like is very different to, 300 people turned up at my project. It's visible and tangible, and you can count it and put it in a spreadsheet. Some of the work we do is really sort of under the ground, relational sort of ways of working that don't bear fruit for years, and even when it bears fruit, you can't necessarily say it was anything to do with what you did. So it's really hard,
Yeah.
But what also helps is the evidence, because of the evaluations that's going on around systems approaches around the world now, like around England. There is more and more evidence that to help us understand what value is, the value that is produced through relationships, and the recognition that there's visible and invisible value in this work, and we're constantly challenging where we're asked to draw straight line cause and effect between things, where it's not possible and wouldn't be right to do so, and actually would be counterproductive to the relationship you're trying to build, because it might be seen as taking credit for the work that an organisation in somewhere else in the system is doing, to kind of point to it and say that's because of our organisation or because of our influence. It would actually weaken the trust in the relationship. So it turns a lot of things on its head in terms of how you report progress and describe your contribution as well. So that all sounds really hard, but there are some very, very simple ways of supporting that process that we've learned about.
Yeah, fascinating. What a journey. And I think just reflecting on what you were saying around, people having their own missions, and the language might be a little bit different in some of those documents, but it's all kind of working towards more active lives and getting people moving across the system. And with active lives, you talked a little bit about data there, Hayley. Like, have you been able to demonstrate like the impact of people moving more, like in terms of physical activity levels, and also just curious, any other measures around the work that you're doing, physical activity, sport, health, or whether it's reducing crime or education or anything like that? Because I'd be interested to know about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So you certainly need, if you're trying to influence across the system and at a population scale in this way, you need new forms of measurement and evaluation. Here in England, we've got the Active Lives survey, which is brilliant because it helps you to track change over time. It's repeated. There's a methodology that you can draw a graph now over quite a long period of time to see the change. So what we were seeing before
sorry, just on that, sorry to interrupt. Just for our listeners, like the Active Lives, is that what sample is that? How often is that done?
Yeah, so it's done every year. There's a children's one and an adults one, and it's done every year, and it's done across the whole of England by Sport England. And so you've got that repeated pattern. There's different versions of it. So Wales do a version of it, but yeah, it's been going for 10 plus years here, and it gives you that sort of longitudinal picture. So what you can see at Greater Manchester is before the pandemic, Greater Manchester was improving at 2.5 times the rate of the national average. So that was quite stark when you looked at the adult data and the kind of graph. COVID, Greater Manchester and places of higher levels of deprivation and kind of some of the kind of regions of the country were hit harder by everything to do with COVID. You know, we spent longer in lockdown and all these kinds of things that contributed. And there's sort of structural inequalities here that are so closely tied to inactivity. So during the pandemic, you saw a steeper than national average like drop off in the curve. But then the recovery post-COVID has been faster than the national average as well. So, you know, you can look at that and it gives you some degree of confidence that if that this is something's happening here that's worth noticing. Now you can't tie that, like I was saying before, you can't tie that directly to that's because of the role of my organisation and the 35 people whoever are working with us. So we need organisational kind of progress measures and indicators to understand like our contribution to that overall data, because there are so many influences on active lives data. You know, a pandemic for one, you know, it's things that are totally outside of your control. But yeah, so there's trend line data in terms of population level activity. You can then break that down by demographic groups, by place. We've got now small area estimates, so really looking at neighbourhood level data in some areas, which is new and really, really interesting and helpful. The other thing that we know is that you need, you know, if this is about culture change, you need ways of noticing whether culture is changing. So is language changing? You know, what are the traces of culture change through a system? So there are some other indicators of change that you know will contribute to people moving more, but it's really important to notice what they are as well. And that might be on really kind of small micro level, it might be quite big scale change. And you see it, it's almost like you just see it all over the place now, and it's a bit overwhelming in a way, because you know you can't capture it all. You can't capture it. And I was talking to somebody yesterday who was talking about a conversation she's had. I mean, she's had, you know, marginally connected to this word, but she'd been out on a walk and with a friend, and this friend was talking about how she wears trainers to work, and that turns out that 2 years ago in their school where they work, that the policy had been changed. Now, 7 years ago, whatever, 6 years ago, I did a TED talk on active souls and how we should all be able to, we were talking about enclosed cognition, and you should be able to wear shoes you can move into work. Now, you can't prove that that school changing its policy had anything to do with me doing that TED talk or Andy Burnham making it policy across Greater Manchester and public services, or you cannot prove that sort of cause and effect. But what you see is more and more people wearing clothes and shoes they can move in to work. So there's just a really specific example. But but being able to notice what's changing, what do you see, feel, and hear? What can you count? What's the kind of, and then what's the kind of under the surface? Where are the connections and the relationships growing and building? So there's like the growing web of relationships and points of connection to this work that you can trace and track if you had the time to do so and you decided to put your efforts there. So we don't try anymore to do it across all of the work, because literally you could spend all your days counting and measuring and noticing and capturing, but we do have sort of systems and processes in place to help us do that and to notice. So for example, we do an annual survey around with stakeholders around system maturity, which is the evidence and evaluation work has shown that there are some key enablers for change. And so we survey stakeholders on an annual basis, but to what extent, on a scale of 0 to 5, are they seeing strategic leadership that enables collective leadership? To what extent are we seeing people taking a learning and adapting approach to the work? To what extent are we involving people and communities and growing community capacity and capability through the work? You know, to what extent are people seeing transformation of governance and processes? So there's these enablers that you kind of, it's a reflective practice of what have I seen across the course of this year, to what extent is that shifting? And so we've got data now over a number of years, which is showing that change from, and actually really good example is the thing that is hardest to shift is transforming governance and processes. That's the one we've made least progress on. As a whole system, it is, you know, it's repeatedly stuck. And if you think about that in practice, that's commissioning, procurement, it's all of those kind of legal stuff that gets in the way. It's so important to the work, but really slows the work down, and that, whether that's nationally or locally. So I suppose, to summarize, it's a layering of data. There's population level activity data, there's data about system maturity and how much we're creating the conditions for this work. And then there's very specific, within our team, project and program, more traditional, what you'd understand is more traditional, X amount of money invested, X number of schools engaged, X number of people taking part. We still do all that stuff. So it's not either or, but it's making sure that we're using the right kind of methods to understand the change and the progress that we are striving for in the work. So a mixed methods approach, in summary.
Mixed methods.
You look exhausted, sorry.
Both quantitative and qualitative, that, isn't it, together?
Yeah, exactly,
So primary research. I think what's coming up for me, Hayley, is around the relationships is so important. And it's, you do something here in the system and it's not cause and effect. And if we could let go a little bit of these performance indicators and not be so structured on this is what we need to achieve, it becomes more of what I'm hearing. It's like a way of working. This is how we, we share, we collaborate, we have these are principles, and it's once we let go a little bit and collaborate a bit more, that's coming through for me really strongly. I know the data is what.
Sorry, cut you there. And there's some inner work, like you've said, there's inner work that needs to happen in order to make that transition. But you cannot do it unless the system around you is creating the conditions for that. So if you've got downward pressure from your board or your funders or your, and there's a dissonance between that, from politicians or whatever, it can't be upon us to do this, to make this change on our own. The system has to recognise and create the conditions for a different kind of measurement and evaluation that's aligned to a complex way of working. And there's always friction and tension in that, because there's, when you trace it through, when we're in a political system where there's elections every 4 years and people need to prove that what they invested in made a difference, or what they're going to invest in is going to make a difference. And at a fundamental level, that drives a particular mindset and set of behaviours. And people want to know what the return on investment for that money is, and should they put it there or should they put it there? And that is a complex set of conditions to work through in work that's like this. But it is the nature of the beast, if you like. And we talk about, you need to feed that beast.
Yes. Yeah.
And you need to slowly change its diet to one that's more healthy and sustainable. That's the way we describe it.
I love that. But it's holding that, isn't it, of the things you have to do and work within the system and the political nature of it. But then it's like, can we be creative over here as well? And it's not one set of rules, is it? It's a multitude of things, like you said. And I'm just curious around. I know you've got the boroughs over there of the different councils. Like, how have you got all those to work together? As from a, to look more regionally of a geographical place. So it's not just, they're not just focused on the local government area. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, Greater Manchester has a long history of the 10 local authorities working together, so that's massively helpful in terms of setting the conditions for that. That is also difficult, because there's inherent competitiveness naturally within places, isn't there, and drivers, and people being forced to compete for money sometimes, etc. The best example, I suppose, of that, the way we've tried to support that culture shift, is through what was called the local delivery pilot, is now called Place Partnerships work with Sport England. And the way we set, that's one of the first things I did when I started working in Greater Manchester. The way we set that up was to create a community across the 10, so that people were, it was about building strong and trusted relationships between the 10, and then also between the 10 and the GM layer, because there's like a Greater Manchester layer of administration, if you like, and team, and then there's 10 places. And within the 10 places, the work was to try and build strong and trusted relationships between the community leisure provider, the local authority, public health team, the community and voluntary sector organisation. So trying to support the process of an interconnected web of relationships within each of the 10 places, so that there was a mission and a focus and a collective effort. And over time, and it's lovely, and they've met this week actually, that there's 10 teams in a room together and they're working together, and there's peer support, there's an openness and a sharing of journeys and progress and learnings and challenges in that network that would not have been there, what we're now 7 years ago. People would have sat on their own tables in their own places. There wouldn't have been those relationships. And now it's about involving people in the design. So we're just about to start the next phase of the design work for that, and the group, they're then designing it together, and everyone's part of one team. So that feels very, very different than it used to. And it's a process. It does take time to build trust, especially in a system which has inherently been driven to compete with itself for so long. So, because often there's a national funding programme and the 10 places have all got, so it's like a bun fight. Everyone's kind of fighting over a pot of money, so you've got to shift some of those systems that are national as well. And we've worked really hard to try and create the conditions for that.
Yeah. Oh, that must be a great feeling when you're seeing everybody working together and collaborating and all with a shared agenda. So well done, and to you and your team, because I know it's many who are doing this work. I just want to talk about your blog a little bit, Hayley. So for anybody who's listening, you've got a blog. I think it's Leadership, Learning and Life. And, we talk about vulnerability. You've really shared your journey throughout all this work in your writings and, some of your biggest learnings, which, as soon as I see you put something out, I'm reading it straight away, to learn, for your work at Greater Manchester. But is there anything that would come to mind in terms of emerging in your work or your thinking of where you're at the moment?
That's a good question. So since the new year, been really focused on that sort of idea and question, really, of the value of relationships, because everything points to the fact that strong and trusted relationships and relational ways of working are fundamental to this work. And I think it was just after Christmas, I was podcasting with Professor Carolyn Wilkins, and I was like, what we're going to talk about this time? And there was this article that she'd read around relationships as value, and emergence in work. And so we started to explore this, and Scott Hartley and I talk and write together a lot. And so I suppose, the last couple of months has been about trying to tease out in my own mind what that's all about and how important it is, and grappling with this question, really, of how is a relationship an outcome in and of itself? And, so yes, and I've begun to sort of understand how I think about that is a relationship has value in it, and it produces more value because of what people in a relationship go on to do. So there's secondary and waves and waves and ripple effects of value that will come out of the relationship that you and I have, that then leads on to the actual work we might do together and a podcast we might record, and then that will have a ripple effect that we might never know about, we won't ever know about, but sometimes it comes back and you hear it, like the woman who's wearing trainers to work as a teacher. So so that's one thing that I'm still in. So like sometimes I write a blog and it's done and dusted and there's a bit of a conversation around it and I kind of move on, but there are some that are like you stay in them for a longer, and so or the topics, you stay in the topic for longer, and I'm still pondering and it's spinning off into different conversations that I'm having around the work. So that was one, and then the other one that was sort of probably back end of last year was blow my mind. Again, it spun out of a conversation that Scott and I had walking down the street to a meeting about physics and about how things can be in more than one place at a time. And I was like, what on earth are you talking about? And he was talking about this article he'd read about yeah, quantum physics and things passing through walls. And I was just like, this has blown my mind. And we were like, "Grr, you know, what are you on about? Why does this even matter in our work?" And I don't even understand. So I came home and I talked to my husband, who's a scientist, and my daughter, who's a mathematician. And I was like, explain this to me.
Well, they're the right
And
people
then I
to
kind of,
talk to, surely.
yeah, exactly. So kind of the light bulb went off. Oh, right. Why does that matter to me that you could be in, that something might be in more than one place at a time? Well, we've got now 42 people trying to make change happen across 2.83 million people in a city region, trying to influence change nationally. We have got, you know, however, 37 hours a week to do that in. Like, why that matters to me is because I need to understand, we need to understand how we use our energy, time, capacity to best effect when you're trying to make change happen at a population scale. And so how can you be in more than, how can anybody or anybody's ideas or learnings be in more than one place at a time? Because that's how change happens. Because if you can change mindsets and worldview and thoughts, feelings, behaviors, even when you're not in the room, then wow, you know, you can change the world.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Even when you've retired, you're still, and you know, never a better example of that than Lyndon Rowley, who did some work as a consultant, you know, 10 years ago in Greater Manchester, who's now retired, living on the coast. I went out to see her the other week for the day, and we talked and we did some stuff and shared what was going on. And I can tell you that stuff that happens today, every single day, is because of Lyndon.
Wow.
And she's retired. She's got her feet up. She's by the sea. She's going for walks on the beach. So there, that's where my head's at really at the moment, is about that sort of disproportionate influence, the value of relationships, and the way that, because my team need to understand, if they're writing their business plan for this year and it says to the board, I'm going to spend my time building relationships with adult social care, I'm going to spend my time building relationships in the transport system, the board might go, well, so what? They will. So what? That's nice. You're going to bring a load of people together in a room and chat and have coffee and look at data and talk about ideas. You need to understand, like, why is that important in this work? And it's important because relationships grow belief and agency, and then people think, feel, behave, do things differently, and in service of the mission that you're focused on. And that's, in a nutshell, kind of what this work is. Goes back to right where we started, really, about the job is to have constancy of purpose, that a mission that matters, and then help people to join in. And helping people to join in is through relationships and agency and belief.
Yeah, I think that's really summarized well. You know, it's that self-determination, that agency that people can have, empowerment, then human skills. Essentially, we're stripping it back down to, you know, and relationships and caring for others. Yeah, fantastic. We've got just about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to move on to these last two questions. But this is a bit counterproductive. Well, in terms of a question anyway, because systems work is many things here, Hayley, but if you could nudge one part of the system to get more people active, where do you think, and maybe this is contextual with it, you know, each area is different, but yeah, from your experience, what would one of the main intervention areas be?
It's got to be national. No, well, there's different layers to that. Nationally, we need governments working together
Yeah.
on health, and you know, and health and inactivity and inequalities. So if I was nudging one part of the system right now, like, we haven't got the conditions set here for what we're trying to do in terms of national policy and ways of working in Westminster, in civil service, you know, right across government. So that feels quite hard to change. And, you know, this is the constant dilemma, is where you put your efforts as well. What can you actually influence and control? And what do you care, what, you know, what matters? And then where you put your efforts. So we are doing more and more policy and influencing work and trying to support that cross-government approach. And there's some brilliant work starting to emerge here, with Kim Ledbetter doing some ace work around that. So nationally, I would say that. In Greater Manchester, again, it's sort of partly national, but there's something about DWP, like so into DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, employment, employability, supporting people who are out of work, living with long-term conditions. I don't know what it is, I haven't quite got that, but it's so important and so critical to what we're trying to do to support health, economic productivity and activity, and that work there, it always feels harder to get it moving. And there's a lot of, for example, there's some beliefs and assumptions that people hold that, if you're off work and you're on benefits, you shouldn't be active because you might be sanctioned or lose your benefits. Like, there's a fundamental deep-rooted belief that the system would say isn't true, but there's a real disconnect. So, and that's a very kind of micro example, but yeah, that's an area where we've made the least progress so far. And you have to decide then, so you put your energies elsewhere, and then at some point something will unlock in that part of the system nationally, will unlock, local conditions will start to move, and that might be through the next wave of the devolution arrangements, whatever. So there's some things about this, when all the doors are open to you have to decide, like, where are you going to put your energy, where can you make the most difference just right now, and sometimes you have to let go of, well, that really matters, but it's not moving at the moment, so let's come back to it, or let's wait for that moment when something unlocks. That might be a change in leadership, it might be a change in policy, for example. So that's locally I would say that.
So you have to be a bit agile and think about where you can get your most bang for your buck, because the conditions have to be right to have the biggest influence. And when we talk about influence, this is the last question. Where do you see yourself now, Hayley, in the system, and how you contribute and influence it?
Oh, what a good question. What do you mean, where do I see myself?
Yeah, like, obviously you've been in this work for a number of years, and you've grown your team, and you just some outstanding work, really at the cutting edge of things, and you've been leading and learning the whole time, which I really admire. But yeah, you obviously you contribute and influence it. But yeah.
Well, no, okay, I'm with you now. Yeah, so I just completed my sort of annual performance and development review process and 360 feedback from my team and from stakeholders and partners.
Yeah,
and it's been it's always fascinating, and it always helps to kind of take me to into the next year with I know what my contribution is now. So there's some really clear data that is driving me this year in terms of what my contribution is. And part of that is about creating the space to think and write and share learning. So creating the space to hold a global community of practice and learn and share from other people. So it's that kind of recognizing, I suppose, that I have learned a lot and have skills that help to sort of share that. So we need to create the space for me to do that. So I now go on a quarterly retreat and I write, and that's designed in. That's part of my objectives, from that are agreed and driven from the board. The other bit is about leading in spaces that feel a bit tricky. So, and I've really struggled over the years with a sense of, because of my upbringing and background, I don't like to be known as the boss, and I struggle with hierarchy. And it's really interesting, what I've heard loud and clear this year in the 360 feedback is from the team is to recognise that there's a role that you can play, and we want you to play it, and don't shy away from it, because actually when you speak, or because of your position and experience or the role you play, things happen differently when you step into those spaces. And so there's a leadership air cover I can give. So, for example, we're starting to do more and more work around trans inclusion, and everyone has a right to an active life. And the trans inclusion work that we're doing needs my kind of air cover and leadership in it to enable the kind of the groundswell of people who really, have a role to play in that work. So there's some really interesting little. What I do is I tease out really from the 360 feedback that I get. So, like, what are the patterns in what people are saying, and what does that mean for what I need to do next? So that I make sure that I play the role that only I can play. So I'm not treading on other people's toes, and I'm not in things that I shouldn't be in. And that we used my time and capacity and energy to the best effect. So my kind of work program is layered really with global, national, Greater Manchester system, shifting stuff, the leadership of the organisation and GM moving, and then my own personal and inner development. And there's six boxes, and there's a structure and there's a plan, and it's very clear where my efforts need to be. So yeah, so I think that's where I see myself is, I suppose what I'm being asked to do is use all the evidence and the learning that we've got to be confident, compelling, take us further, be ambitious and radical for the work, and continue to do that, and create the conditions for the movement to grow.
Wow. Yeah, that was a great answer. And I love the fact that learning and development is really key as one of those pillars as well. So it's ongoing for you, and and it seems like you provide a real protective environment for your team, which is what you as a leader. And I think just to bring that to a wrap, Hayley, I just want to personally thank you for the support that you've given me, and the advice, and when I asked that question, I also I feel you contribute much more than what's happening in Greater Manchester and nationally. The work that we're doing over here, and laying a path a little bit for us to follow in our own kind of context with Western Sydney movement. So just wanted to say thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I hope it's a joyful journey and less painful than the one I've been on.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we're getting there slowly. But is there anything else that you'd like to finally add?
I guess the thing that we haven't sort of touched on, which is so important, is where we started, which is I'm a community activist where I live, and that when you said like where are you in the system, my family is a system, my community here is a system, and I do think that and then my leadership work is part of a system. One of the things that I think is really important is that, and I see this in people who do this, who hold very senior positions, and then they coach their kids' football teams, and they're rooted and grounded in their communities or in real work as volunteers. And I think all of the things that play out in the work that I've described across this last hour also play out in my role as a trustee of a charity in my community, as we're trying to build our new community centre and develop a healthy, active place for people to live here. And it's actually quite simple. It is actually quite simple. And there are repeated patterns and enablers of that change. And here I see every day how it all comes down to relationships and trust, and people being able to play their role and make their contribution. So I think I'm always conscious that it can be a bit mind-blowing, like in terms of the scale and the complexity and the way I'm describing it, but actually it's very, very simple. It's about knowing what you're aiming for. It's about developing great relationships and supporting each other on a journey to something that makes the world better. And it is simple. It's joyful. And we need to be kind to ourselves. I think we all work really hard. We think really hard. So you have to kind of lighten it up and enjoy it. You've got one life. You've got to enjoy it as well.
Enjoy the
work
journey.
is a total joy. It is. It's such a joy. I absolutely love it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think your best years are ahead of you. I think with all this, I think you're just getting started, Hayley. So, yeah, and I'll hopefully get to see you in a couple of months when I head back to the UK. So,
absolutely. I look forward to it. Well, thank you for the opportunity. What a great start to the day.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, okay.
Yours.
Yes. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Thanks,
See you
Hayley.
soon. Thanks,
See ya.
Bye.